All right, so hey everyone, welcome back to episode 12 of the SillyPoint Podcast. So today is going to be an awesome episode because we have an awesome guest with us. We have Chirag Mahapatra, who's a graduate 2013 batch of NITK. Chirag needs no introduction, but for the sake of formality, let's just have a quick rundown of his just a few of his crazy accomplishments. So he's the founder of Blaze AI, which was recently acquired, and he's also an angel investor and a tech leader. So he built and sold Blaze, which is a YC-backed AI marketing platform that raised more than $5 million. Prior to this, he was an engineering leader at Meta as well as Airbnb. And his he entered Airbnb through a startup that he was working at, which had a successful acquisition by Airbnb. And the startup was Trooly, which was focused on identity and trust verification. And he also holds a master's degree from UC Berkeley and, of course, a bachelor's from NIT, NITK Surathkal. So, Chirag, welcome. It's so great to have you. Hope we're not disturbing you on a Sunday morning, given your busy schedule. But it's great to have you here. So, first thing is just generally, so what are your thoughts on like podcasts and all like tech bros talking about, and their podcasts and everything like that?
Well, Hari, really, thanks a lot for inviting me, and really excited to chat with you today morning. And definitely, this is such a fun conversation I've been looking forward to for the entire week. And yeah, and thank you so much for the warm introduction and making me sound nice about myself. So really appreciate that. I think I think like you kind of brought up like podcasts and like what's the why it's interesting. And I think there are a few reasons why it's kind of taken off, right? One is like it helps us like podcasts have essentially taken as a format have taken the control of the full like audio market. And like there is and I think that's a pretty large market, which let's say people listen to audio while they're on a walk or they're driving or any of other such activities where like having a visual screen is not the easiest. But podcasts are also like some of the best podcasts. People also listen to them on YouTube and all of those sort of things. So I think as a format, it solves multiple purposes, which is that it can work even when you do not need to have a visual screen, as opposed to some form, some type of content where like a visual, like being able to see the content is actually extremely important. Like for podcasts, it's not important, and I think like that's kind of why for a number of activities which people do every day. Example, like let's say most people drive to and from work, and that's like 1 to 2 hours. And so podcasts definitely find a great place in people's daily activities there. So I'm really like bullish about the content format, and I think it can. Yeah, I think it's still fairly early days, and I think like and of course there's already tons of amazing podcasts focused around startups, businesses, which are really great. So yeah, looking forward to this one.
True, true. So I think like over the last couple of years, it's really kind of taken over as a dominant method of, like content creation. Like very similar to, I think in terms of its growth, it might be very similar to like what you mentioned, like the music industry, because it seems to play like a similar role in our lives. But yeah, it's kind of crazy like how things have changed. Like I think like let's say from the time that you were in college. So but yeah, so speaking of which, so let's go back to NITK a little bit. So do you have any like memories, like what, like any earliest memories about NITK that you want to mention? So
Yeah, I mean,
what is profound, like any impactful professors, any impactful memories?
I think like as with many things in life, like I think the most important thing are the people and the people you find. And I was really lucky to like meet some amazing people who were like not just ambitious, but also were just like really nice and humble people, and who really brought the campus experience to life. And I think as in many universities, what's really interesting is people are trying out different things. People are uh, trying and exploring different fields, different
Mhm.
topics, and then also like pushing each other to get better, and like either in a both competitive as well as a collaborative way. And that's what I really liked about the school, because one is, because like it has a certain level of isolation, which actually like makes the campus life really amazing, as opposed to some colleges in India where like the campus is very integrated into the city. So the
True.
campus life part of it does not may or may not be the highlight. But I think in this case, because of the certain level of isolation from the nearest cities, like the campus life part was like extremely important and was a ton of fun. So I really like that point of view. And I think in terms of some of my experiences, I mean, there were a bunch of those, but I think one of my most fun ones was this building something out in during my third and final year of college. So,
Mhm.
and I think the problem statement which we found at that point of time was like the food within the campus. I think everyone knows how challenging mess food is. And then, of course, like, and the local eateries were a ton of fun. Like, I think there was this Maggie guy, paratha guy, and all that sort of stuff, which are pretty awesome. But we felt like there's an opportunity to get like more contemporary fast food to the campus. And I think and there was a great timing as well, because I think in the previous like 6 months to 1 year, a KFC and a Domino's had opened up about 30, 35 kilometers away.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was close enough that like people could go there, and people were familiar with that, but
Mhm.
still far enough that people wouldn't go there every day. So then how do you kind of create a logistics service to essentially like go collect orders, go pick up those orders every day, and then come back? And we found that that was something which was like a phenomenal yeah, it was a really good business, and especially for the campus location, I think it made a ton of sense. And we started off by just building out a very simple like web application, and it was, I think, just a simple form where where we uploaded the menus from Domino's and KFC, collected the people's orders and things like that, and then we would
Mhm.
just I think we would either send an email or send a phone call, do a phone call to confirm with Domino's and KFC, and then we partnered with a couple of like local auto people who would go and pick up and deliver the order every day. And that
That's
was it. It was,
crazy. Yeah, that's
yeah,
crazy
it was,
because I think that's around the same time where people start like Swiggy, Zomato, and everything. So I think Swiggy, Zomato started like in 2014 time somewhere, and I think you
yeah,
started this in 2012. So you're like a bit ahead of the curve. So it's kind of wild. So that is really taken over now. So like a
yeah,
lot of people and really really love using those services, and now it's gone like a level above also, like with a few new companies like Zepto where they're doing like quick commerce, like
exactly.
in a matter of minutes they're trying to deliver it. So it's been crazy. So how is quick commerce like outside of India? Is just something like out of curiosity. So is it popular? Is it growing in, let's say, US and other states?
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, I think like people love convenience in every part of life, and people do, and I think like it was non-obvious. A lot of times people felt that like would people pay for convenience,
Mhm.
and if you ask my dad, he would say like, yeah, I would never pay for convenience. But then when the option is actually available, people actually end up picking it up, and I think compared to the and it's fascinating that the more guarantees these services provide, and I think like uh, more about like being able to deliver in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and things like that, the more popular these services become, because uh, at the end of the day, no one grocery shopping is an important part of your daily life, but there are not too many people who are jumping with joy about like doing grocery shopping every day. So or and in many cases, like food, getting food delivered is more of subsistence issue rather than enjoying phenomenal ambience at a given place. So I think um, I am really bullish about like any sort of services which improve like increase convenience as part of
Mhm.
people's life. And when it's priced appropriately and the unit economics work out, those companies can become really, really big.
Yeah, I think you were on that trajectory, but you decided to go to your masters. I mean, it's obviously great, but I think India is lost on a potentially awesome entrepreneur. So, what kind of motivated you to go towards your masters? So, I think you already like had a on-campus job. from I think Goldman, if I'm not wrong, and
Yeah.
but you still decided to go ahead and go with the master's. So why not? Like, what motivated you to like avoid, like, keep aside a couple of years of job experience and like directly go to a master's?
Yeah, I think one is I wanted to find my way to Silicon Valley, and like I wasn't sure of how else to do it without doing
Mhm.
grad school. So and so I applied to a few schools and picked the school which is like closest to Silicon Valley, and essentially found my way there. And I
Mhm.
think and it was why, because like I think you'd heard of like tons of phenomenal entrepreneurs
True.
from the space, right? And you like at that point of time had heard of like Facebook, Google, and all of them were based out of the Bay Area. So I think I was just excited to see how how I can find my way there. And that was,
Yeah.
I think, the primary motivation. I think there's definitely uh, and that was probably like the dominant factor there. In terms of
Mhm.
doing work experience, getting work experience and then doing grad school, I'm not sure like if your final goal is to do grad school and or come to the US. I feel like just accelerating that part of life instead of spending 2 years and then getting some experience and then doing is probably makes more sense, because
True.
all of these sort of things compound, right? So like if you spend 2 more years in the Bay Area and you actually end up staying there long term, you have two additional years to compound there. Or you stay in India and you stay there for 20 years in a row, learn the local system and all of that sort of stuff and how to build things. That also compounds. But I think at some point of time, like you just need to pick your path and you kind of figure out what works for you, and then just make the call there.
True. It's kind of crazy you had that foresight, like, that effect compounds, like that 2 years make like compounds and that 2 years makes a huge difference. Because I've met a lot of people like my batchmates, they're still a bit like fuzzy about, should you go for a master's or should you like, continue staying in India? Because right now it's a bit more of a dilemma because the startup scene in India has become so much more active. So
Yeah.
people are kind of a little bit shaky, like, you could stay here and you could like have a chance at creating real wealth. So is there any advice you would give folks like that?
Uh, yeah. So in even in that case, like what I would recommend is, yeah, if your goal is to create a startup, then you should just start by building that startup out
Mhm.
rather than working for a couple of years and then doing the startup. In most cases, because I think those end up being different skill sets. And there's also like the reality is you can also create something amazing by being in a company, by joining other people and joining forces with other people as well. So that's also a great path. But I think like just having some level of clarity on what you want to do, at least for a reasonable amount of time, and just starting to do that is it kind of becomes really important. And so that's, I think, yeah, I would definitely be the last person to say that you have to move to Silicon Valley to build something. I think like, I mean, some of the Indian startups are just crushing it. And like, I mean, Zepto's one of the newer ones, but I think like Swiggy, Zomato, and all of those, like I think they have done really well, and I think Zomato has had pretty reasonable success on the public markets as well. So I think all of those sort of things play out, and I think the ecosystem is really strong. I think some of my friends who went back to build a company in India, they're actually extremely successful for their experience here, and then kind of building company in India. And yeah, so I think all of those pathways can work out, but I think instead of just being tentative, just picking one of those paths and then having some level of conviction to at least try it out. And of course, unless things are not working out really badly and you need to pivot, you should do that. But like in general, if just picking a path and then and sticking to it probably works out.
Makes sense, yeah. So I think even these folks, like, I think large number of them have actually decided to go, let's say, the first job, get some experience. But I think as long as what you're trying to say is that they have conviction in that and they decided to carry it on forward,
Yeah.
and that could still pay off big time. So,
Yep.
so what was your first job like? Like after going to the US and your master's, what was your first job experience like? What were your key learnings, and how did that impact your way of thinking, like directly coming out of acads into like like after such a like so much of a catch like BTech, sorry, your undergrad, your grad school, and then finally your job? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I think my first real exciting job experience was at this early stage startup called Trooly.
Mhm.
So, and I was excited about startups in general, but what I really found were impressive about the startups, they were using like publicly available data to make marketplaces safer. And at that point of time, like marketplaces like Airbnb and Uber, Thumbtack, and a number of those had spun up. But there was still a question mark as to like how safe those marketplaces are. And what I really liked was was the founder's vision on the fact that like traditional processes like background checks did not do a good enough job in terms of covering bad actors. And being able to mine the public web is actually helps you find that signal which you might need in many cases. And finally, it also lent it to the human behavior. Like a lot of the times at that point of time when people were finding an Airbnb, they would actually do a simple Google search and about the host just to see who that person was. And I don't know if that behavior is prevalent today, but I think that back then it was pretty normal, right? Like Google was the primary way to find information. So they would just do a simple Google search and find stuff on the internet, which like, let's say, the background checks wouldn't catch. And that would be a pretty challenging issue for marketplaces. So, and especially like where in marketplaces which are focused on which have similar which can have a lot of human interaction, right? Like let's say labor marketplaces or care delivery marketplaces, as well as shared rental marketplaces. Those sort of things where you are having a meaningful connection with another person. I think like removing some of those risks become important. And I think like the company did a pretty good job of being able to aggregate those data sets and then also like identify the exact use cases where which those exact use cases to solve for those marketplaces. And yeah, was really happy to be part of that journey.
Nice. And were there any like key learnings? I mean, given that this was like your first, like let's say major job experience, were there any ups and downs? Like what was your takeaway from it?
Oh, 100%, right? I think like with any sort of like when you're joining a startups that early in its life cycle, there are always ups and downs. I think the one is figuring out like what we realized at that point of time, that marketplaces was a good initial market, but was not where we wanted to be long term. And so then we tried to sell the similar software for financial services, and that was a slog. Like it was extremely hard to, figure out the enterprise contracts, pilots, etc., with financial services. And I think I was actually part of the tier, team also doing some level of delivery, also like sales to some of the financial services and things like that. And that was extremely hard. And I kind of built a ton of empathy around people where like sales is a huge part of the job, because just being able to uh, convince like some of these large enterprises on why they should work with an early stage startup which has been around for like less than 2 years is an extremely hard job. And so I have a ton of empathy for people who do that from my experience there. And yeah, it was very challenging for us to sell into the financial services business, which is why we, at the time when the acquisition offer came along, it just made sense to do that. So I think I would say that was the first challenge. I think the second challenge, which I would all and it has been throughout the my career, is like just being able to hire amazing talent. I think one of the things people under index on is like how hard it is to hire the most amazing people, because the like truly talented people have lots of options and lots of opportunities on things they want to work on. And so being able to hire those people at in an early stage startup was something extremely hard. So, and I think like thinking through that, and of course, like different companies have different philosophies. Right? There are some companies who just will hire tenured people, which is like, okay, I'm going to work only with senior software engineers who have, like built things for 5 years. Other companies which lean very early, like I'm just going to hire people straight out of school and like kind of grow and build with them. And I think having a philosophy as to what it takes to build for your company, being intentional about culture, being intentional about uh, how you want to like build a company is extremely important. I think that was probably like a second big learning for me from that time.
Okay. So how did you handle that pressure? Like people asking you, like, can we work with a company that's just 2 years old and give them this responsibility? So did you target other companies that were also startups and, did you try to sell it to them? Like, what was the strategy there? Like, how did you try to solve that problem?
Yeah, so well, the challenge is, and like if you're selling to other startups are typically small, so you typically won't have large contract sizes. What you're hoping for is though you kind of grow with those startups, and as those startups grow, you're their preferred vendor. So that's one model which I think works pretty well. But I think at that point of time, we were focusing primarily on, like trying to go make inroads through the larger enterprises. And yeah, I mean, I think and those larger enterprises were a lot more skeptical about like using an early stage startup. And I think that was the big learning there. And I think like whenever those large enterprises are kind of like exploring working with startups, they always ask the question, right? Like, can we build this in-house? Do we really need to, work with another vendor and, figure out all the thousands of things we need to do to work with a vendor, right? Because when you work with a vendor, you need to figure out what data is being passed to the vendor. Is that data sensitive? Who has access to that data? Does that cause repercussions down the line? And yeah, and I definitely empathize with enterprises who have to work with startups because there's tons of things to think about. So I'm not saying it's an easy process.
True.
And yeah, and I think back then you didn't have those easy soft tool like what people have with Vanta and all of those like all of these companies to essentially help you build processes which make startups a lot more secure. I think at that point of time, I vaguely remember one of my colleagues had to just figure out the entire software process from scratch. And I think the founders gave him this huge binder of files, and then he had to read through every single page manually to figure out like actually how to have the company as software compliant. So which I think things have gotten a bit easier since then, but I think it's still a pretty hard process for startups to sell to large enterprises.
Yeah, I think it's much better today. There are a lot of startups that are focused entirely on like compliance and legal
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it's definitely much better today. But yeah, 10 years ago it might have been crazy. So where did Airbnb come into the picture exactly? Like how did their acquisition proposal come in?
Yeah, so I think at that point of time, Trooly was doing well, and I think Airbnb was one of our largest customers. And I think like the founders had a great partnership with Airbnb. So then I think at some point of time, Airbnb was figuring out okay how to scale their own trust and safety team, and whether it made sense to build internally or buy. And I think in this case, there was since we were a vendor who already had spent a lot of time with the Airbnb team, like we knew a lot of people internally and had a level of trust. And also like both ways, right? Like trust kind of needs to go both ways. So I think then there was a mutual excitement about doing the deal. And yeah, I think like it made sense as a great landing spot. I think Airbnb was still in its like hyper growth days, was growing really significantly at that point of time. And I think people were really excited about the opportunity now.
Nice. So how did like Airbnb end up becoming one of the largest customers?
So I think this problem was really important for all marketplaces. It was especially important for Airbnb because I think trust like Airbnb, like you're on the host side, you're entrusting the platform to find someone who's going to stay in your house. A house is, someone's most like valuable possession, right? Like,
Yeah.
and like a lot of people tie up their entire net worth in the house. So there's definitely a level of skepticism on the host side, and there's a
Mhm.
level of skepticism on the guest side as well, which is like, like we are staying in somebody's house. Is this person, like someone uh, who is safe? How do we know that they're not like any issues in the house and all of that sort of
Mhm.
stuff? So trust and safety was a huge part of like huge part of building trust at Airbnb, because you want to minimize or almost eliminate all the bad incidents which can happen. The North Star of the trust and safety team was like zero incidents happening. So then being able to use technology in a better way to be able to identify bad actors, and then be able to process them appropriately was one of the things the company really focused on. And I
Yeah,
think
makes
like at
sense.
that point of time, the Truly team had a fair bit of experience in like mining the web to find bad actors. And I
Mhm.
think that was the skill set which they valued.
Okay, so and this is how you got into like passwords and identity management and things like that.
I think honestly that came more organically during the my time at the company. I wasn't looking at it intentionally.
Mhm.
Uh, Over time, and I think companies go through waves.
Mhm.
When a company is going through a growth phase, then essentially like you when you're growing, you also have like uh, there when you're growing, you also have a number of other problems, hair and fire problems, which kind of get get put in the shelf because you're focused 100% on growth. But in some
Mhm.
cases, you also need you over time companies start having a balance in which like it's not growth at all costs, but you need to be able to figure out other parts of the product stack and all of those sort of things. And initially, of course, around the time where we joined, like trust and safety was the primary, like one of the largest problems in the company, because like there had been a few incidents on Airbnb in the past. But I think over time, like once that problem, the company felt like it had a reasonable handle on that, they actually wanted to reinvest in growth. And
Mhm.
then in growth, if you think about it, like one of the most key parts of the user journey is sign up to booking, right?
Yeah.
So, which is like you sign up a person, and like how the let's say in a product like Airbnb, the more actual thing of value is having an amazing let's say I'm a like, normal user, I'm hearing of Airbnb for the first time. The actual thing of value is that vacation. It's not the digital experience is one thing, but the actual inter life experience is the most important thing.
Mhm.
And how do you get people to that? And some of the things which I was working on with some of the teams I was supporting was essentially how do we make that sign up to booking process as seamless as possible.
Yes, yes.
And at that point of time, we were kind of exploring new authentication mechanisms as one of the paradigms there. But we were also exploring like a number of booking based optimizations and all of those sort of things,
Okay.
and try to understand like what can work and what can't work in those
To make the
situations.
process more seamless.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And so your interest in like, so I went through like a couple of, you'd written a couple of blogs also about like passwords and
Yeah.
what could be the future and all of that. So this was completely organic. It's not like there was like a trend and you wanted to just, see, like explore what it was about. This was like a genuine interest in terms of improving like the user experience and all of that.
Yes, I think so. And I think like one of the things which I have always found about passwords is that it's still not the best mechanism for users to authenticate, and yet it's
Mhm.
probably one of the most dominant mechanisms which is out there on the internet.
True.
And so then that's primarily because like the concept of authentication came in after the after the like basic internet protocols such as HTTP.
Mhm.
And I think like we have kind of layered on this authentication mechanism But now there are like better solutions available, right? Like
Right.
and I think one is, of course, social login is probably a very common mechanism, and I think lots of companies have adopted that. Then there are other ways of like augmenting passwords with with a second factor, either via an SMS or TOTP and all of those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final thing is just like using some level of biometrics, whether it's Face ID, Thumb ID, and all of those mechanisms. And I think like the realization is that some of those other mechanisms can also be serve as a great primary authentication provider. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we are there yet. We're in a world without passwords, but I think it's definitely getting there.
Makes sense. So, I think after Airbnb, so you decided to move to Meta. So, what was your reasoning there, and what was the idea behind that move? Because things like it was going great, and it was acquisition, like it was acquired, and you had been there for a while, almost 5 years. So, what motivated you to move to Meta? What was changing around that time that wanted you? You were like, yeah, Meta is where you wanted to be.
I think it was the opportunity in the team at Meta, and I think that was something which I was really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
This team was building cross-platform experiences. So one is like Meta is one of the only, not one, I think it's probably the only company in the world which has three apps which have billion plus people each.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there could be a couple of other companies which have that, but I think Meta is the like, one of the at least top ones which comes to people's mind. And then amongst those, then each of those apps have grown pretty interestingly and differently. Right, like I think Facebook.com was built internally, and then Instagram and WhatsApp were acquisitions. But even in those Instagram and WhatsApp, like the strategies were very different. I think WhatsApp for there was less focus on monetization from the beginning and more focus on international growth. While Instagram, I think there was some level of emphasis on monetization from day one, and a combination of US and international growth. So like a lot of different strategies were applied. And I think in this team got an opportunity to learn more about like how to build an ecosystem which is across all of these products, right? Because I think both all of these products had grown independently, but now let's say as the company starts building a layer or platform across all these products, like some cross app experiences, right? Like one of the cross app experiences like stories. So stories is
Mm-hmm.
a pretty helpful cross app experiences. So
Right.
then how do you kind of enable those sort of things across these apps? I think that was something which I found to be really fascinating engineering product, team problem, as well as as well as a scaling problem. And I think one of the most interesting things I saw is like even after probably like 8 to 9 years of the acquisition, like Instagram and WhatsApp still have very distinct cultures from that of Facebook. So I think just like with distinct like product and engineering cultures, and I think that kind of makes these sort of projects really challenging. So I think I definitely enjoyed that challenge and like was really excited about that.
Nice. And so I think at this point in your career, you went from more like an engineer person to like managing like
Yeah.
teams and larger and larger teams. So what was your like experience like? Was it an intentional thing, or was it something that as you were becoming more and more more and more in like you've built more and more products and such? Was it something that was happening more organically, or was it something that you intended and you wanted to manage larger teams and all of that?
No, I don't think I was ever intentionally looking for that.
Mhm.
I think it's something which happened organically. I think for me, my best days are the ones where, I can spend a lot of the time coding and just building things out, experimenting with shipping product.
Yeah.
But it also like, I think there do come opportunities, like later on in your career where like a lot of the value you can create is by, getting a group of people to work more effectively and building
Mhm.
leverage from that rather than building everything out yourself. And I
Makes
think
sense.
like that is an important skill set which I did learn, and I think was something which I have grown to kind of appreciate. But
Mhm.
also like yeah, I think like like especially when you have to get like, because it's not just like scaling the engineering teams. And as you're scaling the engineering teams, you also are scaling with the number of like people from other functions you need to work with to push an idea
True.
forward, which is you are typically working with product managers, designers, data scientists, operations, legal, policy. And all of these people have some pretty phenomenal backgrounds and views in their own right. And like and you in a company, you actually need to work across all these people to get stuff done.
True.
And that's essentially like the I would say is the more important skill set, where like within the framework of a company, how do you get stuff done
Mhm.
across large teams? And I think that's definitely a extremely important skill set, which I think people need to be able to figure out. So I think that was the skill. I think that was the primary takeaway, and it was something which definitely happened organically, not something which I was intentionally looking for. But I think like that's a as teams and companies scale, I think that's a very important skill set for sure.
Makes sense. And did you face any difficulties like moving from, let's say, like an engineer and like a person who loved coding to a person who was more oriented towards people and management? Like, were there any roadblocks, obstacles you faced, or did you feel like that transition was very natural to you, given your experience, like already working at startups and all of
I don't think it definitely wasn't natural, because how you spend most of your day, it does change a bit.
that?
But I think it's something which I think can be learned.
Hmm.
And I was and probably still am really focused on like what's the most impactful problem in a company and solving those. So I think in some cases, the most impactful thing you can do is just be heads down
Hmm.
and ship a new version of the product or ship a total new product. And in
Hmm.
other cases, the more biggest value you can add is, getting people to work well together to essentially ensure your system is scaling, it's reliable, it's functional, and all of those sort of things. I
Yeah.
don't think it's one or the other. And I think some of the best engineers are actually like ones who can straddle both skill sets.
True.
And I've actually seen like a consistent pattern where like in some of the top engineering managers in the Bay Area, where like they would go from a manager role to an IC role, then back to a manager role and things like that. Because like
Mhm.
being an IC also helps you like build and maintain those hard skill sets, which are really important.
True.
But also being able to manage groups of people and getting stuff done is also an extremely important skill set as well. So I
Yeah.
think you kind of need to probably like straddle both and see what mix is something which you like.
Correct, yeah. And I think now you had like all of the skill sets needed. I think you, after this, after working at Meta, you decided to go and have your own startup. And so, what was the motivation to start Redrera, and why at that particular point of time?
I can answer the why that particular point of time, because
Hmm.
like that was yeah, more than a year and a half after the pandemic. But I think I was one of the things I really enjoyed about working in a company was being able to work closely with people. Like you're all like huddled around a given laptop and solving that problem. Of course, during the pandemic, all of that changed, and it was a very Zoom heavy work experience, work structure. And
Hmm.
that was not something which I was I realized I was going to enjoy. So I really, love the companies I worked with, but like I think just, working in a Zoom heavy environment during the pandemic was not something I was enjoying. So then I realized, okay, like this is not something I'm enjoying. So this might be a good time for me to explore and start something of my own.
Oh,
And at that point of time, we also like we had spoken to a few startups, and we realized that a lot of the startups were essentially also figuring out the same thing. That is, how do you build culture in a startup? When everyone who's been hired has been hired only after the pandemic. So a lot of people were figuring out how to get their remote teams together for offsites. And so that was the initial idea which we worked on, which is kind of a tech-based service to help companies organize offsites. And then all the idea was over time you figure out how to automate this. And yeah, I think like that was and we applied to Y Combinator with that idea, and we're fortunate to get in. And I think like they also saw that's something which is like was pertinent to a number of companies in their portfolio. So they were like, okay, this makes sense.
Right. And when you're talking about organizing offsites, like what exactly do you mean? Like, do you mean like official meetings, like for managers to catch up with their, like their team, or is it like some sort of team building activity? Like, what was the objective in terms of like offsites?
So most of the offsites we were supporting were multi-day offsites, and like essentially, let's say you have people, and this is again like in the middle of the pandemic, so like everyone was fully distributed across the country. Right. So then you have people in Bay Area, LA, Chicago, Austin. How do you get all of them together in let's say Denver to meet and figure out things? And in some cases, it was more of a team building sort of thing. In other cases, it was a lot more of like figuring out a strategy. And I think most companies ended up doing both. I don't think it's like one or the other. The best, like most companies actually like would have some team building, some strategic aspects to those conversations, and kind of create like an offsite centered around that.
Makes sense. And like you mentioned, then you got into Y Combinator, but later you guys decided to pivot, right? And
yeah.
I think that's where Blaze AI came into play. So what was your motivation behind pivoting, and what was the indicators that kind of told you that, yeah, this is something, it's time to pivot and, take it to a different path?
So Retrera as a business was actually doing pretty well, like because it was a primarily like tech-enabled services, and to be honest, at that point of time, it was primarily a services business, and I think it was something which was going pretty well. Though I think the original pitch was, can we automate everything and make it a fully seamless product experience? And what we realized is that we had significantly underestimated the difficulties in automation in this space, especially in a group travel situation where you need to figure out accommodations which let's say you have a team size of 30 who is joining the offsite. You need to figure out accommodations which can serve 30 people. And when you're booking for 30 people, it's typically less of a one-click process and more of a multi-step process, right? Because 30 people will have like their own preferences on how they stay, right? Some people may not want to stay with some other people. Some people might have different schedules and all of that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of manual processes needs to figure out just an accommodation piece. And then even figuring out the actual on-site activities is pretty challenging, because like you need to create like different itineraries, figure out what events a lot of people like. There's a lot of surveying which goes on, which is, hey, like, do we want to do a hike, or do we want to go to the beach, and all of those sort of things. And then like it's not typically, as with most human things, people have heterogeneous preferences. And so then that's why most companies end up hiring an event manager on the spot. And then the final piece is like you need to actually figure out travel, and travel is another can of worms. So one is everyone will be arriving at a different time. Then they'll need transportation to go from let's say the airport to the hotel or the resort and all of those sort of stuff. And figuring all those sort of things out. And in many of those cases, it was like a lot very phone call driven and not fully automated. So what we realized is that, like, I think initially we thought it'll be pretty seamless. What we realized is this is something which is very, very far from being very seamless. And I think like it's very like services oriented business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point of time, what we realized that's not something which we were excited by.
True.
So then we decided to move on and focus on something which we were a lot more passionate about, and so that's
Okay.
how we came to the idea behind Blaze.
Okay. And did anything? So Blaze was Retrera was into like organizing these offsites for remote companies that were working remotely, and Blaze was trying to do marketing automation for various startups and so on. So it seems like a pretty big jump. So what was the thought process behind it?
It was a pretty big jump, and actually during our entire Y Combinator batch, we were in this idea maze or idea pivot hell, whatever you want to call it. But and I totally understand. It was not a linear point of view, and like um, marketing automation piece actually came in a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
We pivoted a fair bit. I think we launched about I think 12 products, like one every week during
Mm-hmm.
YC to see what stuck. So we worked on some meeting transcription, meeting automation. We built on how do you build a better people management system, Slack chat bots, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that process was really good because we were shipping a ton of stuff and
Mm-hmm.
seeing what stuck. Towards the end of YC, what actually stuck was you have these large communities which were on Discord, Telegram, and Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
which had a ton of activity, but people were having difficulty in understanding the users there.
Okay.
And so we had a number of customers who came in. Okay, hey, we have this Telegram group which is blown up. Now
Uh-huh.
we don't understand our users and things like that. And we were also starting to see some early. There was a lot of crypto adoption of Discord
Okay.
and Telegram and Twitter. And then there was also some early signals of some AI companies adopting Discord as well. So I think both of those are really fascinating industry. So we're like, okay, cool. This seems like an interesting space to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so what we were initially doing was helping our customers understand product issues, support issues, etc. on by analyzing Discord, Telegram, and Twitter.
Yeah.
And then over time, what we realized is the actual value prop is not just understanding the user, but creating marketing, creating growth campaigns for these channels. And that ended up being the bigger thing, because the reality is in most early stage startups who are adopting this, growth is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized while there is a lot of the number of tools such as Apollo, Zoom Info, etc. for growth and traditional channels, there
Mm-hmm.
weren't as many tools for growth on Discord, Telegram, Twitter, and that's kind of the market we wanted to play in.
Nice. So that's where you're moving away just from the market. You decided to, I think, also start writing blogs and stuff. I think Blaze AI helps in it does the full end-to-end marketing, not just understanding what conversations that are going on. Based on that, you can also generate deliverables and stuff.
Yeah, I think we explored with a number of different product features and all of those sort of things. I think what the product which resonated the most was being able to identify who are the people whom you should be reaching out to build out your Discord, Telegram, and Twitter. I think that was, and being able to create campaigns around that was the most important feature. But then I think, yeah, we experimented a lot of other features in this space and to help our customers out. And some worked, some didn't work. But I think the core thesis around how do you help businesses grow their Discord, Telegram, and Twitter is what stuck.
Makes sense. So I think Blaze, what Blaze did is really, really interesting, to put AI agents together in terms of automating the workflow towards marketing. But right now there are a lot of tools let's say NA10 and a lot of, even in terms of general code generation tools, let's say Claude 3.7 or something.
Yeah.
So these tools really, really simplify the process of developing AI agents for entire workflows. In fact, on NA10 you can find like templates, pre-existing templates that kind of like, this is my data source and I want to like, the output should be like YouTube shorts or some sort of marketing content and stuff like that. Do you think these type of platforms, that like these no code AI platforms, could be like a real problem for startups that are operating in this like type of automation space? Because a lot of these templates are like at very low cost, like let's say $5-10 or even for free. So do you feel like these like this rapid type of no code tools coming into play will be a problem for startups operating in this space, not just Place but in general?
Well, yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a natural evolution, right? Like, and I think note that like I see NIT as more of a competitor to Zapier rather
Mm-hmm.
than what we were doing, because a huge part of our value was also the data piece of things, right? Which is like analyzing like hundreds of millions of users, extracting signals from there, being able to
Mm-hmm.
classify those users, being able to find similar users, and all of those sort of things. While the automation piece was definitely one of the things, which is like, like doing some level of message automation to users to be able to like inviting them to join. But I did like, that's just one piece of the puzzle. That's not a full piece of the puzzle. I think for us, like the data piece was also extremely important to our customers. But I think for companies like N8, I suspect like their largest value comes from, let's say, like being able to do tedious tasks around IT operations, security operations, DevOps, sales, and all of those sort of things, rather
Mm-hmm.
than doing general marketing automation. So
I see.
in fact, I would suspect that there'll be like like tons of tools which just come out which focus on creating workflow automation only for marketing automation. I mean, like Clay is of course like one of those which is probably like blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a huge opportunity in that as well. And I think that's the natural evolution thing, right? With every technology cycle, like you end up having more interesting ways in which you can improve the status quo. So yeah, I actually like think this is the right way to go.
Makes sense. So basically, like we can automate, like let's say one part of it, like content generation in some format or something, but the overall value that is added by a company like Blaze, like in terms of analyzing the users and trying to find the signals, is something that will be very hard to replace, is what it seems like.
Yeah, very hard to replace for now, but I'm sure like in the long run, like yeah, people will come and do something better as well. Like
For sure,
that's how
yeah,
things happen. Yeah.
makes sense. So how did like what do you feel like was YC's like main contributions in terms of helping Blaze grow and evolve and helping you guys build? So you mentioned a very valid point there, like during the demo days you tried to like during your pivot phase it was extremely helpful. So what are the different ways in which like YC or an incubator in general can be really helpful?
Well, the first thing is it wakes you up to the level of intensity required to build startups. And I think the reality is like startups are extremely hard, extremely challenging, and
Mhm.
you need to maintain like an intense level of focus to, keep moving fast, shipping things, and
Mhm.
building something people want and need, right? So, and I think that's that was what I learned from the time at YC, which is like, and like there were tons of other startups around. Like while I don't think anyone said that they had figured everything out. It was great to see other people who were just continuously pushing the boundaries of like what's possible in their respective domains. And I think so. In terms of the biggest value prop from something like YC, that's the number one, which is being around people who are kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The second thing, also learning from different people's experiences. Not all startups work out. Startups have a very high failure rate.
Mhm.
That said, I think being able to understand what works and what doesn't work, and being able to like structure based on that is
Mhm.
like learning from other people's experiences and honest experiences is something really valuable. I think back in those days, YC used to do like a weekly meeting with like some of the like top ex-YC founders, and just learning from them their journey. When those founders were in like challenging positions themselves, how they figured things out and all of that sort of stuff. just makes you also realize that like, okay, every startup goes to a ton of challenges, and you need to have like a problem solving attitude to solve it, but also helps you understand like what are the tactical and strategic ways to get around some of those problems. So I think like, and I think the final value of something like YC is the alumni network.
True.
Essentially, once you're in YC, like I think like you can tap into the alumni network. They have an internal forum called Bookface, which is really awesome, and there's like a ton of like historical value as well as continual value from that. So for example, like one of my favorite posts on Bookface was this like the growth hack, which I think Parker Conrad and Rippling had implemented for one of their growth strategies. Mm-hmm. And then you can also like ask for help based on some of the things which you are seeing right now, which is okay, like and I think the community, the network of like extremely successful founders, mm-hmm. as well as just seeing your peers who are working extremely hard every day is probably like the primary value points of YC.
Right. I think the community is like the biggest selling point, right? Like once you have a really strong peer group, like it's just like the progress is just sky's the limit at that point.
Exactly.
And there are very few communities in the world like YC. So like the smartest people across want to build something, like you go to YC. So yeah, I guess it must. But any specific examples like how you mentioned during your pivot that was a huge impactful thing? And anything else like in terms of contribution towards Blaze?
I think like one of our group partners, I think Aaron, like one of the things is he like when we were in the seventh iteration or seventh idea in 7 weeks, he was like the best piece of advice he gave was, okay, there's this other startup which is really successful. I think he was referring to Brex. I don't remember exactly. They had done like even more number of idea explorations and vision. And they figured out their actual final idea just 2 to 3 days before demo day or something like that. And that kind of, those sort of stories are really fascinating because like when you're exploring a seventh idea in 7 weeks, and it can be a bit of a letdown as well, that like, okay, you don't have conviction in any one of them. Are you any good, or like is this even worth trying? And I think just like having those group partners who have kind of seen through multiple iterations of founders who have done this sort of thing just helps a ton in terms of just being able to figure things out. So I think like those are the like micro stories which really help from a YC point of view.
Yes, makes sense. And so for startups that are, like aspiring to be a part of a YC batch or something, do you have any particular suggestions or any mentorship advice that you'd like to give them?
I think just apply, right? Like, I think it's YC, the good part of the YC application, it's pretty accessible. It's a simple form which takes about like a few hours to fill up, and then you should be off to the races. And I think like just listening to what the like YC partners itself say about the application just helps goes a long way, which is have a very like concise, to the point application, which helps you identify the problem, which helps you identify the solution. How much money do you expect to make? What can work? What can't work? And why you are the best team to solve this? And just addressing all of those sort of things in a very simple and clear manner will just go a very, very long way. And so I think I would just like laser focus on that, like not focus too much on like are there any like tactics or strategies to which help you get selected? Just focus on those, like the business fundamentals, and the application will figure itself out.
Okay. And in terms of, let's say, revenue, or in terms of engagement in social media and all these things, like, is there any numbers that would be more helpful to present? Anything that you need to, keep ready?
I think revenue is, of course, extremely helpful, right? So, and I would focus less on the actual number and more about the growth rate. So if there's a company which is growing phenomenally well, and I think like in YC, typically the benchmark they have is 20% a month over month growth, like that, where they feel confident about a company. And even that's a heuristic, right? Like as every company grows 20% month over month, then like that 20% growth does not mean much. But essentially, like having a solid like business which is working well, which is growing quickly, is probably what matters. And again, all of these sort of numbers, like it also depends on industry to industry, right? Like take, for example, if you're an early stage, let's say space company, it's less about the like revenue growth rate. It's more about like the number of LOIs or interest which you're getting on your startup. Those are very different things.
Okay, makes sense. So, but the essence is find some way to stand out in terms of your growth. Like the actual metric might be different from be based on your domain, but you need to kind of like growth is something that matters a
Yeah.
lot.
You don't need to you don't need to stand out in your like within the peers and startups which you are part of, right? And that's how you get selected.
Okay. And in terms of mentorship and for applying to YC, like are there any portals and communities that people can look out for?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I used any portal or mentorship for those sort of stuff. Just like I think reading the YC blogs and podcasts should probably be enough. And I think more importantly, I think just focusing on the business. I think that's the most important thing. There's only so much there's only so much you can do from like third party advice, right? Like I think just focusing on the business, making sure that the business is doing well is probably the most important thing.
Right. So I mean, you've done so much at this point, right? Like you have so many career wins and all of these things. So what motivated you to go for an MBA, right? On top of like all of your qualifications, all of your experiences, like what was the driving factor for you to go for an MBA?
See, the MBA actually happened much like it's earlier there and sort of thing. And I actually like deprioritized my MBA after I got through YC and focused 100% on building.
Okay.
The way I would think about an MBA, and again, it's like a very personal decision for everyone, right? So I don't think it's like there's a one single point here. There are certain careers where having an MBA helps you with career transition. So if someone wants to do an MBA for those specific career transition, and typically those industries are like consulting, investment banking, and things like that, where like an MBA definitely helps. And they use the MBA as a funnel to identify the next cohort of people. I think you should definitely get one.
Okay.
And in some other cases, it's a good way for people to experiment with what they want to do in life long term. Like because of course when you're working, you may not have the mental bandwidth or like just to figure things out. And the 2 years in the MBA actually help you in just like figuring out what matters to you and why. There are of course other ways to figure that out as well. Like MBA is definitely not the main way, or I think as you have identified, not the most optimal way as well, because the like MBAs can be pretty expensive. But yeah, I think in some cases people do find that as a value. And the third reason, which I think like a lot of people resonate with, is like MBA is 2 years to just like go and have fun. Like most MBA programs have like tons of trips and vacations and all that sort of stuff. So it's a good way to travel the world with like-minded people. I think depends on whatever way you want. I think you can I think majority of the people fall in these buckets, which is either you're looking for a fixed career transition, which is available only via an MBA. Typically, that's consulting, investment banking, or you are in an exploratory phase of life and you want to like essentially, let's say things such as trying out VC or private equity or maybe like search funds and things like that. Like those sort of things are not immediate, and there's typically about 1 to 1.5 year of ground game which you'll need to play to actually get those to figure those professions out. And MBA provides you with time with that. And the third thing is just as a 2 year break to decompress in life and then just have fun.
Right. I mean, everyone needs a bit of like, just quickly gather their thoughts and decide like where their career wants to go. And MBA is probably really helpful for people who are at that phase of their career. Yeah, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I just as a closing note, I just wanted to bring attention to like some suggestions that you might have to like the next generation of like Indian founders. So like in terms of let's say funding versus bootstrapping, like what would you suggest to them?
Ah, that's a great one. I think like there are very strong opinions on either side. If you at least look at social media, there's some people who would who say that they would never take VC funding, and other people who would say that okay, like bootstrapping doesn't make sense, and you can never build a big business out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think about it in a more of a like neutral fashion. I think both of these are vehicles to build businesses, and you
Okay.
need to figure out, which vehicle is most applicable to you or for what your goals are.
Okay.
If you want to build one of the fastest growing companies in the world, the
Mm-hmm.
path is typically VC because you do like to build a fast growing company in a competitive sector, capital is one of the requirements.
Okay.
On the other hand, there are a lot of areas which are like not do not really need a significant amount of capital and
Mm-hmm.
also do not have competition, right? Like
Right.
and essentially you can grow slowly and steadily with just you don't need capital infusion to be able to build that company out. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, if you can find some of those businesses, more power to you, right? Like, but uh, like I would say I don't think one path is easier than the other. It's
Mm-hmm.
you need to pick your poison and kind of go from there.
Makes sense. Another reason why this debate keeps coming back up is the rise of things like indie hacking, for example. So, are you aware of what indie hacking is by any chance?
Yeah, I'm aware.
Right. So, I think nowadays with things like a lot of these hacker houses and these residency programs where people are trying to just create a small side project like in a niche sector that can generate some amount of revenue for them to get
Yeah.
stability, right? Without necessarily having to become like an extremely fast growing company and stuff. So what do you think about like this transition over here? So do you think like people will like over time be like, yeah, let's just get some financial stability, right? Let's make a few couple of thousand, $1,000 extra every month and let's be set. Why take on the extra, like stress and headache that comes with dealing with like third party people who are giving you money, VCs and all these people? Do you feel like there will be a transition, or do you feel like these two fields of interest will independently develop? Like though there will always be folks who want to go into like building extremely fast growing companies, and there'll be a separate group of people who want just like that financial stability of getting some extra money at the end of every month. How do you think these two fields will kind of interact with each other?
Yeah, and I don't think it's even a transition. I think this has actually been there for a very long period of time. Like there have been people
Mm-hmm.
who have sort of, like build their own safety net and then started their own business. And there are other people, who have just kind of jumped in, asked for funding from other people, and kind of gone from there. I do not think this is a either or situation.
Mm-hmm.
This is something it kind of ends up being like what do you want in life. But one thing to call out is like there are power laws in everything,
Mm-hmm.
which is you in the indie hacking space. You have something like someone like Peter Levels who has a like who makes $3.5-4 million a month, so yeah, a year just by himself. And there are tons
Mm-hmm.
of people who struggle to make even like $500 a month. So
True.
I think, and that's the same way with companies, right? Like in whatever you do, typically there are like strong power laws across the board, and just because like you're even if you choose a given path, you still need to succeed in that given path. And it doesn't mean that like okay, picking that path is like one way or the other. Like even I would suspect like the indie hacking world is also extremely competitive, and the
Mm-hmm.
VC funding world way of doing things is also extremely competitive. I mean, I think you can also tell, right? I mean, like you have started your podcast and stuff like that. I suspect it's not the easiest job to actually grow your following and stuff like that. So it definitely takes time. It takes effort. It takes figuring out like what your audience wants and all of those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think both are fairly competitive parts. It comes down to, how you want to structure it. And again, it also comes down to like what sort of like risk you want to take and stuff like that. There are tons of like bootstrap founders have kind of grown the business to a certain level and then have taken on external capital. It's every person has a different set of risks which they're optimizing for, and it comes down to essentially a personal choice of the founder.
Right. And also the resources that you have access to, right? Sometimes you
Exactly.
don't
Yes.
agree.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very circumstantial, but you need to evaluate it at a personal level, like what suits you best.
Yep.
Makes sense. And what about any thoughts on like for folks to navigate, let's say the Indian market? Do you feel like there's the unique there are some unique aspects about the Indian market that people should either look out for or could probably exploit and explore a little bit? What do you feel like? You've been both on both sides of the fence. You've been in India, you've had a company here, as well as you've had like plenty of amazing experiences in starting your own companies in the US. So, what do you feel was different, and what do you feel can be leveraged in India compared to, let's say, in the US?
That's a great question. I mean, I think like one of the things which Indian startups have been really successful at is trying to serve the global market.
Mhm.
And even if you look at like the first generation of like Indian companies, like the TCSs, the Infosys, the Wipros of the world, they have done a phenomenal job of like being able to serve like global tech companies and like provide IT services to them.
Mhm.
And yeah, they've built enduring companies from that. And I think like there's definitely a genre of Indian entrepreneurs who continue to do that, which is like build in India, but serve the entire world. And I
Okay.
think I suspect like that's something which like Indian founders are going to continue to get better at and excellent at. I mean, Israel is probably the country which does that one as the best, especially like in areas such as cybersecurity. But I
Mhm.
think Indian founders are also can have a pretty good strength in terms of figuring out the systems to be able to build in India at a
Mhm.
slightly lower cost, but being able to serve global markets. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
Makes sense. Do you see any rising consumer trends in India, any particular waves as such? Because one thing we already discussed was definitely the quick commerce segment. Is there anything else that you feel is particularly active now and interesting that people can watch out for as a good space to keep track of?
Uh, let's see. I mean, I think the quick commerce one is definitely fascinating.
Mhm.
I would also, I think one of the things I'm really interested in is in, figuring out like how do LLMs lead to like more level of personalization in India, and especially in India as an economy where like education is still extremely important. I am curious as to like what the future of personalized education would look like for in India, and
Oh,
that's something
nice.
which I think like in the last in the last 2 decades or so, like, but I don't think education has been like as personalized as it can be. And
Mhm.
then I think going forward, there's definitely an opportunity for that.
Makes sense. So, are there any companies that you feel are interesting that are actually reflecting your thoughts in this sense? That they're actually trying to pick this up, personalization of education?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there is a startup called Kalam, which I think is, or I think they call it a Super Kalam, which is like
Super.
building, yeah, personal tutors for every student.
Mhm.
And I think like they're focused on the test prep category, and they seem to be doing really well. And yeah, I think like Vimal is a phenomenal founder, and I think like and he's targeting one of the hardest exams in the world, which is the UPSC exam. So I
Mhm.
think like I definitely see a ton of opportunity there.
Nice, nice. And like another thing, since you mentioned LLMs, right? There's a bit of a conflict that is going on. Like, what is a country like India or like let's talk about general first. Like, what is the better segment to attack? Like, is it like the model layer, like building better models and trying to outperform, let's say, let's say OpenAI or Claude or something like that? Or is it better to focus more on, let's say, the application layer and like the tooling layer and stuff like that? Like in terms of the future of LLMs, what do you feel would be more impactful?
I suspect it's going to be very hard for a new startup to compete with the OpenAI's, Google's, Anthropic's of the world, because of the amount of resources those companies have, and not just the like capital resources, but also the technical talent who have flocked to these companies to essentially build this out. It is going to be extremely hard for someone new to come in and like build something meaningful here. And I think like that, I suspect, like, I mean, there'll of course be new players, like, you have someone like DeepSeek who kind of figures figures a way out. But I think like DeepSeek is probably like the exception and not the norm.
Makes
And
sense.
DeepSeek has has a phenomenal like model in itself, which is like I suspect that it's like funded a fair bit by the hedge fund it was part of, and then kind of go from there. Most companies do not have that level of luxury to invest in getting the talent as well as building the model out. So short on that, yeah, I think like I would say I suspect like someone new, when it's like 2 to 3 people sitting in a garage and figuring things out. I think like figuring things out at the application layer is probably the path to go. But again, never say never. With the right entrepreneur with the right skill set can figure everything out.
Yeah, and DeepSeek is particularly crazy because like there was this norm that you need more, like you need a lot of GPUs and bigger models to be able to compete with Google and stuff. But these folks did it by using a different training methodology. They used reinforcement learning and stuff.
Yeah.
But obviously, like you said, that's probably an exception and not the norm. So it's something that people should keep in mind if they want to, pursue a more research-oriented thing, like at the model level. Um, so now obviously given that applications and tooling is going to take over, I'm suspecting you've heard of like model context protocol, MCPs and stuff like that. So how do you feel like is the like the relationship between like using agents to automate workflows and using MCPs to automate workflows? What do you feel is the relationship? Is there really a difference? Like folks who are building agents for something, should they continue building agents, or should people like start thinking like, let me make an MCP server for this, and that is the way to go forward?
So the way I would think about it is like one is like what sort of application architecture makes sense for your workflow, and then what your business model is, right? And I think like and it kind of comes across as a trade-off for for those. Now, new developers can start building and testing MCP connectors today itself, right? And I think that's something which I'm like, and essentially like then for new developers, it kind of becomes as a like you're an AI tool developer. Your primary goal is to like figure out, understand a given workflow, figure out what connectors are most relevant, and kind of go from there. Or it could be like an enterprise, like figuring out how to use their existing data. And in some other cases, in other cases like that may not be the most pertinent problem and things like that. So I see all of these are like as different architecture patterns. So I think like it totally comes down to the what's the business problem which is being solved here. And I think MCP was seems to be a really cool launch, and like provides developers with another option there.
Makes sense. So I just wanted to wrap it up with more of a open-ended question. So if you could go back and kind of give yourself advice back, like in your college days and stuff, like about career or entrepreneurship, about life in general, like what advice would you give yourself?
Oh gosh, that's a heavy question. I mean, I'm typically not the person who like spends a lot of time reflecting, and I kind of just like focus on the path forward. But yeah, I think like if I had to, I would just focus on like what are the skill sets which have kind of become dominant, right? Like one is having a certain set of hard skills, typically around coding, and being able to sell. I think those are the two most important things which people need to be able to figure out across anything you do, whether it's startups, big companies, growing the career ladder, or figuring a bunch of stuff out. Like I think like being really good at one to two hard skills, and then being really good at selling is probably like the what most people should focus on. And then And again, I think, and probably the next thing which I would recommend most people to do is like, I think like not get too carried away by given hype cycles. I think what I've realized is like almost everyone has their own, own opportunities, own times which come. Like I think if you look at like let's say the semiconductor industry like 5 to 10 years back, it was definitely not as hot. But today, like with Nvidia, TSMC and things like that, it's easily the hottest industry out there. And
Yeah.
like I think like industries, etc., go through different cycles. And I think people just need to be like cognizant and practical about those sort of things and realize that like just focus on what you're excited about in terms of the hard skills
Mm.
and then being able to sell in that space is probably like the what most people should focus on.
Makes sense. All right. So I think that's going to bring us to the end of our podcast. So thank you so much, Chirag, for showing up. I mean, we know what an intensely busy schedule you might be having. Right now, I believe you're also an angel investor. So anything you want to put in a word for any of the startups any interesting startups that you're working with, and maybe just tell us a little bit about any trends that you're seeing.
No, I think I mean like I typically like focus less on the trends and more about like what the some amazing founders like who are building things for their markets. And I
Right.
think that's kind of like where I see most of the long-term returns to come out, where like a founder sees something which they're excited about and
Mhm.
can is willing to spend more than like 10 to 15 years of their life
Mhm.
dedicated to that problem. So I think like I would just focus, that's my primary area of focus, which is finding the founders who are kind of excited about that. So yeah, if there's anyone in your network who's building this, yeah, keep me in the loop on that.
For sure, for sure. All right, so I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Chirag. It's been great to have you on the podcast. And yeah, I think we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Awesome. Thanks, Hari. Take care.